So now we're going to start on brain general anatomy. We're going to go through the steps as it develops, and then tell you what it's basically the composition of the different brain areas that we have on the board. This information is also on the first sheet of your lecture notes. Down on the bottom, it says general brain anatomy. All right, so your brain is one of the first things that starts developing. And in the embryo, it starts out as an upside down, like a test tube. And so this is called a neural tube made out of course, nerve tissue. And so the tissue here, the purple tissue, will start swelling with mitosis as it gets bigger. And then three distinctive areas are going to form your brain and the fetus. And so the first area that's swollen is called the forebrain. And the real name for forebrain is prosencephalon. The middle part of the brain is called the mesencephalon. And then the hindbrain area will become known as the rhombencephalon, okay? And now, as this keeps developing and getting larger and undergoing mitosis, this is the final brain general outline right there. And so here is the forebrain, this large purple area up here that looks like a sideways kidney, and that's called the cerebrum. The cerebrum is called the forebrain, and it has specific areas in it named after the bones that you learned in the skull. So the frontal area, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. Okay, great. So that's the cerebrum right up there. And then we have the middle part of the brain. The middle part of the brain is probably the hardest, and because the mesencephalon becomes 10 individual organs or structures, 10 of them, 10 specific organs or structures. So we'll go through those later, but I just labeled some of them, but there are 10 of them, all right? And then the hindbrain, the rhombencephalon, is actually pretty easy. This looks like a little bunny tail on the back of the cerebrum, and that is called the cerebellum or the hindbrain, okay? All right, and so now we'll go over the composition. What kind of nerve tissue is going to be found in these various parts of the brain, and also in the spinal cord. So now, composition. So the composition, nerve tissue comes in two colors, gray matter and white matter. And so when you say or talk about gray matter, you're talking about the neurosomas. Remember the main part of the neuron and the dendrites. So gray matter is high in the main part of the cell, neurosomas, and high in dendrites, the gray matter. So that I chose brown. And so if you look at the cerebrum right here, on the outside, that's going to be gray matter. The cerebellum has gray matter on the outside. Once you open it up, it's going to be a lot of gray matter going around underneath there. And then, where else do you find a lot of gray matter? Going right down the middle of the spinal cord. The spinal cord has gray matter, and it has a pattern. It actually has a pattern to it. Remember on the slides, we saw that butterfly? And so the gray matter makes the butterfly in the middle. So that's where you find gray matter. Then white matter is also present, because if you have neurosomas, you got to have axons. So white matter is mainly very fatty because it's made out of the myelin on the axons. Remember, myelinated axons means that that axon is wrapped with those Schwann or oligodendrocyte cells, those neuroglial cells. And so white matter is high in axons and high in dendrites also. So I chose orange for it because white, I guess I could have just left it empty. And so the orange represents white matter. And so in the cerebrum and in the cerebellum, we have white matter in the middle. In the middle, it's all concentrated in the middle of those two areas. And then in the middle part of the brain, those 10 structures, they're all made out of white matter. That's it. No gray matter in the middle part of the brain, not at all. And then the spinal cord has, going around the outside of it, the outside, it's got white matter. So it's got white matter and then the gray matter in the middle. So that's how the distribution of the white and the gray matter are in the various areas of the brain. Now we're going on to specifics about the cerebrum, the middle brain, and the cerebellum, and all this of course can be found in your lecture notes. And so the functions, and then I'm going over the anatomy on the board. Also, if you look at your official pictures right here, very nice pictures of the meninges, the outside coverings, the specific areas of the cerebrum, the cerebellum. And so definitely look at this page 1 and 2 of the brain, because those terms I'm going to use on the board right now, okay? We will also have a separate podcast on just the spinal cord and all the nerves and things associated with it. All right, also one last thing, there is a color-coded brain in your lab book, and I did not put it on the official sheet right here because a lot of these terms you do not know or need to know, and basically it just shows you the 4 lobes in the cerebrum color-coded very nicely, and then specific areas with specific functions. And I've highlighted about 2 of them up here, maybe 3, and we'll talk about those in a minute. All right, so now also forgot these nice pictures that are also in Moodle that you might want to look at again so that you know brain anatomy. And so now let's go back and review basically the meninges, the CT coverings on the entire brain, because I think I drew it a little bit small before, and this is a perfect place to review it. All right, so meninges means CT wrappers that are going to cover the brain. And so there are 3 specific ones: the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater, okay? And so here they are, and so we have the cerebrum right here. We got the cerebrum, the forebrain. I put everything in red for the midbrain, and then here's the spinal cord, and then here is the cerebellum, which is called the hindbrain, all right? So here are the specific meninges color-coded over here. And so the very outside, going around everything here, is the purple layer called dura mater. And that's going to be simple squamous dense reg CT. Then there's a little bitty space underneath it, a little brown space, and that's called the subdural sinus, okay? And then we have the arachnoid mater. Arachnoid mater, again, simple squamous dense reg CT going around all the nervous tissue right here. All right, then we have another sinus under the arachnoid mater, and that's called the subarachnoid sinus right there, and it's right above the surface of the brain. And then the brain is wrapped with a CT wrapper that's loose CT with non-fenestrated capillaries. So the capillaries actually, when they're preserved and dead, of course, the capillaries will come in and they will actually sit in the depressions, and they almost look like little dark worms. That's what makes the cerebrum look sort of spooky looking, because of the dried blood in the capillaries on the surface of the brain. So that pia mater is loose CT, non-fen capillaries, right? And that sits right on top of the nerve tissue, the neurons and the neuroglial cells, the support cells. All right, so that I just wanted to review real quick, like in a nice big picture so that you could see it. And again, I think I said in a previous podcast, when you have blood vessels that break, the blood accumulates in these spaces. And when the blood accumulates in these spaces, that's known as a concussion, right? And so those will fill, and so they have to drain and drain out and be eaten. The old blood has to be eaten by the monocytes, the white blood cells will take care of it, right? And some of it, the old blood will drain out also. All right, so now we're gonna go on to the cerebrum, okay? And so here's a picture of the cerebrum right here. And so the first thing you have to know is that there's 2 halves of the cerebrum. And so I put the second half back here, and the second half is called the right hemisphere, okay? Right hemisphere. Then there's this big crack or space separating the right half from the left half, okay? And that is called the famous longitudinal fissure. So you heard fissures in what? In the skeletal system, in the eye socket. And so those were like cracks, big cracks. And so like earthquake cracks. And so this is a big crack separating the right hemisphere, and this would be the left hemisphere right here. So that's called longitudinal fissure. And then this is the left hemisphere that I labeled, okay? And then here on the outside surface of the entire cerebrum is that little red wavy line, and that is your pia mater, the Lucy T. non-fin, all right? Now, the cerebrum is made out of twisted nerve tissue, and we have a name for the twisted nerve tissue. It is called a gyrus, a G right here. Gyrus, twisted nerve tissue. Why is it twisted? Because when it's twisted, it can carry more memory capacity in it. Instead of just laying something flat in your suitcase, if you twist it into a little ball, you can carry a lot more in your suitcase. And so that's what happens in the cerebrum only. The cerebrum only has twisted nerve tissue, and the twisted nerve tissue is called a gyrus, G-Y-R-U-S. All right, and then between the twisted nerve tissue, there's a crack or a little space, and so that's where your blood vessels are going to be from the loose CT, and that space is called a sulcus, S-U-L-C-U-S, okay? Sulcus is the depression between the gyrus. And so gyri is plural, okay? Gyrus means just one piece, but many of them are gyri, okay? Gyri. All right, so that's what the cerebrum's made out of. It's sort of unique, and so the twisted nerve tissue, which carries more memory capacity. All right, now there are 4 specific lobes in the cerebrum, and they're named after the bones that sit above them, superior to them. And so we have the frontal lobe right here in front, of course. We have the temporal lobe that's going to sit over the ear area. And then basically we have parietal lobe is the big mainframe area. And then in the back, underneath this bone, occipital, there it is. That's the last part. So those are the 4 specific lobes. And now we're going to go through these and tell you what they basically do. So we're going to start with lobe number 1, which I color-coded green. And so the frontal lobe right here, it's mainly for your emotions. It's an emotional center, multitasking center to coordinate everything, memory to recall your task. And so you can remember what you just did, right? So that's frontal lobe, okay? Now, the frontal lobe and all of these lobes are divided into a right side and a left side because we have 2 hemispheres of the cerebrum since it's so big. And so if you're called a right brainer, it means the right hemisphere area of the frontal lobe dominates. And so right brain people are better at music, they're better at arts, crafts, reading, and languages, foreign languages, or any language. And so those are right brainers, okay? They're the artsy types. Now, left brainers are more my style, right? Because I am good in science, not so good in math, but left brainers like math, science, logic, okay? Athletic, and then also spatial relationships. They're very good at judging, down the street, that looks like about a mile. And basically that is correct. They have good spatial relationships in estimating anything. So that's what we call left brainers. So that means the left part of the frontal lobe, right, is going to dominate because the neurons are more geared for genetically for math, science, logic, athletics, right? All right, so that's what we mean right and left brainers. Okay, now there are some people that can do both well, and so that means neither side dominates. But usually most people, you can say mainly, I'm more right brain. I am not more right brain. I'm terrible at music. Art, you can see I'm terrible at art. And so basically the only thing that right brain I can do is probably dancing, and that would be more athletic, right? I love music and art, but can't do it. So I am left brain. All right, so now the second part, this mainframe, this is what we call the mainframe, like a computer. because it's where most of your memory is stored. Most of your intelligence level is determined in this area because of how much memory you can recall. And so it's called the parietal lobe, underneath the parietal bone right there. And so it's the mainframe for memory. That's its big job. It remembers lots of things, everything that you see, etc., or you want to remember, it's the mainframe for. All right, and then what else does it do? It interprets and stores sensory information. So all your sensory information coming from your ears, your nose, your tongue, taste buds, your eyes, everything, that's going to be stored in the parietal lobe, okay? Then speech center is only on the left side. And I've marked it right here. It's called Broca's. Broca's area for speech is towards the front of the parietal lobe on the left side. So if someone has a stroke and that can't talk after the stroke, then you know it's a left-sided stroke versus a right-sided. Because if it happens on the right side, then the left side is not damaged and they can still talk, right? And they can understand words, correct? And so this is a left-sided only, so I put a star by it. And so the speech center is called Broca's, okay? Broca's area. And then towards the back of the parietal lobe, we have another area that's very important, and it's called Wernicke's. Wernicke's area, and it's for word interpretation. So when I say words to you, then you know what I'm talking about, common words, okay? And so you definitely know what I'm talking about. So that is working. This area of neurons interprets and hears what you're saying. So again, in a stroke, if someone has a left-sided stroke, then these two areas can be highly damaged. And sometimes only Broca's might be damaged because the blood vessel that blew right here basically damaged Broca and not back here in Wernicke. So somebody could understand the words you're saying, but they can't talk back to you because this area was damaged, the neurons right there. All right, so that's another big thing for the left side. And then the last thing for the left side is the libido area. The libido area is right behind Broca's. And so libido is your sex drive center, and it's right behind Broca, okay, only. And so the sex drive right here, libido, stick it in right there. Libido, sex drive area right there. And so it's right behind Broca's, only on the left side again. And so this is the center that basically tells you how sexy you feel, okay? And so it's influenced by your sex hormones, obviously, but this is called the sex drive center, right? All right, so that's everything about the number 2 area, which is the largest, the parietal lobe. And then we're going to do the temporal lobe, okay? Here's the temporal lobe. Essentially, it sits above your ear, temporal bone right here. And so temporal has everything to do with hearing and balance, okay? Hearing and balance over here. And so it's interpreted and stored in the temporal lobe, okay? Your hearing and sense of balance. And then the last lobe in the very back, occipital lobe, occipital bone. And so what does it have to do with vision? Everything to do with vision. It interprets what you see, it can store vision images. And so vision is the occipital lobe right back there. All right, so that's everything you need to know about the cerebrum. And of course, there are 12 cranial nerves that come off of here. 12 cranial nerves that will be coming off of your cerebrum, right? And so don't forget those, the 12 cranial nerves will come off. All right. Perfect. Now we're going to talk about the cerebellum back here. That's called the hindbrain, its nickname. And so here it is. It's covered, of course, in pia mater, the inside meninges. Got that, pia mater right here, Lucy T. non-fen. And then on the outside of the cerebellum it actually has stripes, so it looks like it's striated. And so, yes, we call these stripes striations on the outside surface. That's how you can identify it. It sits behind the occipital lobe. You can see it. Looks like a little bunny tail attached. All right, so those are the striations on the outside surface of the cerebellum. And then when you open up the inside, when you cut it, basically in the inside, it has a very distinctive pattern to it. The white matter makes like a tree right in the middle of the cerebellum. And we have a name for this famous white matter tree. It is called the arbor vitae. Arbor vitae means the tree of life, okay? Vitae means life, arbor means tree related. So that is the white matter right here, making that distinctive tree. And then of course around the outside, we have the gray matter with all the neurosomas and the dendrites. And so the white matter, one more time, is made out of what? It's made out of the axons and myelinated axons with all the cholesterol, the myelin, and then also there are some dendrites in with the axons. All right, so that's the inside pattern to the cerebellum. And what does the cerebellum do? What's its main functions? Well, it does skeletal muscle control and coordination. That's the #1 job for the cerebellum. And then it also aids in your balance and equilibrium, okay? Along with the skeletal muscle control and coordination. So that's everything about the cerebellum that you need to know. And so that's all it does, right there. So striations on the outside, the arbor vitae, the tree of life, the white matter on the inside, makes it very easy to identify. We're going to concentrate on the middle part of the brain, which is actually on the lecture notes on pages 2 and 3, okay? All the 10 organs/structures are labeled there. You can also see these parts on the official sheets right here of the brain. You can see all the structures, midbrain, and then midbrain here on the sheep brain that we're doing for lab, okay? So definitely look at those pictures. And then on the large picture of the brain, they are in here, and I put letters to represent what the organs are. Okay, so now on the board, I have the cerebrum, I have the cerebellum, and we've already discussed those two parts of the brain. And so now we're in the hardest part. It's the middle part, and I color-coded each area to maybe make it a little bit easier. And so we're gonna start with part 1. And so the first part of the midbrain is #1 here, and it's called the CC, corpus callosum, okay, corpus callosum. And so it's this arch. So I'm just gonna go through and tell you the names of these things first, and then we'll discuss what they do. So this arch area is the corpus callosum. It's right underneath the temporal lobe, right there of the cerebrum. So the arch is CC, corpus callosum. Then the bottom part that goes straight across is called the fornix, okay? The fornix, that's #2. And then #3 is this large area of white matter right here called the thalamus. And then 4 up here is a little round ball, and that's called the pineal gland or hypothalamus. Pineal gland is the most common. And then #5, it hangs off underneath the thalamus, this little area called hypo, because it's below the thalamus, hypothalamus, okay? And the pituitary gland actually attaches to the hypothalamus, but the pituitary gland is not part of the midbrain. This is actually in the what? Endocrine system. So this is not part of the midbrain. All right, so that was #5, the hypothalamus right here. And then we go to #6, and it looks like a wing, sort of like a wing, and it's called the CQ. The real name for that is corpora quadrigemina. That's why we call it the CQ. It's a big, long word. All right, and then after that, underneath the wing is always the pons. This area will be the pons, always directly under the CQ, okay? That's one way you can identify it because of its location to the pons, okay? And then number 8 is the medulla oblongata right here, the medulla. And so that always sits underneath the cerebellum. That's another way. So wherever the cerebellum starts, like right here, and wherever it stops, then you know this area is the medulla oblongata. And so that's another quick way to identify it for a lab test. Absolutely. So that's number 8 area. And then number 9 is this cute little round ball-like structure, and it's called the mammillary body. It's for your sense of smell, and so it sits right behind the hypothalamus in the pit. And then number 10 are the ventricles, the spaces of the brain. These are actual spaces that they're going to make CSF in, and then it's going to go around the brain parts and feed the different organs. So where are the 4 ventricles? And they have Roman numerals. And so the first ventricle is this space towards the back of the CC and the fornix. This area is ventricle 1. This is ventricle 2, like the front part of the lake, okay, right here. And so it actually will have fluid in it. And so those are the ventricles right here. So I'll label it ventricles 1 and 2. So this is number 10 on my list right there, ventricles. All right, now where is ventricle number 3? Why, it's right here. 3 is underneath the fornix. It goes like this, and then it goes over the pineal gland, and it goes over the CQ. So it makes sort of like a sideways 3. Get it? Sideways 3, right there. So that's ventricle number 3. And then the last ventricle is always underneath the cerebellum. It's right here, right above the medulla oblongata. There's going to be a space, and then the cerebellum, and so that's ventricle number 4. And then I put a little star right here in this area, the star right there, because that's called the cerebral aqueduct. So when you have this liquid, the CSF being produced, and it's going to go all over in the ventricles. It goes from 1 to 2, then it comes down into 3, and then it's going to go into here, and go down here, and continue, and then go into 4, and then it will go down the spinal cord. And so basically, that liquid is made by Leuci-T. And the Leuci-T in the ventricles is called the choroid plexus, and it makes the CSF that will feed your midbrain and total brain organs right there. All right, so those are the ventricles that I just sort of added and explained to you. And so that would be the last part of the middle part of the brain. And then of course the spinal cord is not part of the middle brain, it's its own organ, the spinal cord. And so the spinal cord, don't forget, has a spinal canal, and it had ependymal cells in the inside, which were simple QBT, and they make the CSF that's going to feed the spinal cord area, okay? All right, so now let's go back and see how this middle part of the brain works, okay? And so I wrote out all the definitions on the board for what they do, their functions, and also you can find those on your note sheet, right? So let's first start with an electrical impulse, okay? So I'm going to take black here, and so here comes an impulse. Let's put a plus, and it's coming up. It's coming up, and it needs to go to the brain, okay? It needs to go to someplace in the brain. So the electrical impulse will go where first? It's going to go through here first, through the medulla oblongata, and then it's going to come here and go through the pons, okay? Are you with me? All right, and now it can come up here, and from the pons, right here in the thalamus, here comes the electricity up to the thalamus, and the thalamus can send the electricity down here to the mammillary gland, okay, our mammillary body. And so the electricity can come down here, And then the thalamus can send the electricity over here to the hypothalamus and tell it what to do, okay? And so the thalamus is like a railroad station. It's gonna send the electricity to where it needs to go. And so the thalamus can send it to the CQ right here. The electricity can go to the pineal gland right here. It'll send it, or it will send it up to the fornix right here. The electricity will go up to, all right, from the fornix then, the electricity is gonna go up here to the corpus callosum, okay, the CC. It's gonna go over the top, right here, the little hill, and the CC is gonna send the electricity into the correct area wherever it needs to go to be interpreted and stored by the cerebrum, okay? So the CC is crucial right here, that arch right there. It's gonna send the electricity to wherever it needs to go so that your information can be processed and stored, and then you can send electricity back down. So electricity that comes from the cerebrum right here will turn around and come down the same pathway. It comes down the CC, then it'll go to the fornix, it goes through the thalamus, the pons, the medulla, and then it goes down the spinal cord, and then it will exit. It will exit and take the electricity to some organ, right? To some organ. And that's how you move electricity through the middle part of the brain. Now, the thalamus, when it sends electricity to the CQ sends electricity. It's going to move the electricity from the CQ to right in here into the cerebellum. So the CQ, that's its function, is to move the electricity into the cerebellum, okay? All right, so that's sort of how the electricity runs. It comes up, it goes here. The thalamus is the big key for moving it to all of these organs in this area. And then when the electricity comes to the medulla and the pons, then it can create some reactions, control reactions in these two areas also. So now, real quick, let's go through real quick a review of what these 10 organs or structures do in the middle part of the brain. So the first one is the corpus callosum, the CC, the arch, okay? The CC, it sends impulses to the correct area of the cerebrum, all right? The fornix is the flat part going across. So it sends impulses to the CC, right? And so here it would be. Here is the CC, and here's the fornix, right there. So the fornix is gonna send the electricity up to here, right here, once it gets the electricity, okay? Then the next crucial part is the thalamus, okay? The thalamus. So the thalamus is called the relay station. I call it railroad station, but relay station. It's gonna send the impulses to the fornix, to the pineal gland, to the hypothalamus, and the CQ. So essentially, it's gonna send, this thing is gonna send everything to this, the CQ, the hypothalamus, and so right in here, all those structures, okay? All right, now, structure number four, the pineal gland. So when the electricity comes to the pineal gland, that makes the pineal gland make two hormones, okay? Two hormones, and so they're called neurohormones. So they're made by nerve tissue, but then dumped into the blood. And what are the hormones called? Melatonin and serotonin. Melatonin sets your biorhythm, how much you sleep, and how many hours you're awake. Serotonin basically calms down your nerves, makes you feel more sedated and more happy, or just calm, right? And so that's what the pineal gland does. Now, number 5 structure, the hypothalamus, right there below the thalamus, it is called your addiction center, or your craving center. So if you crave anything, it doesn't matter what it is, even if you eat Comet Cleanser, that's because you've got a malfunction in your hypothalamus, okay? And so it's your addiction center for anything and everything. And so it also, the hypothalamus regulates how thirsty you are every day and your body temperature. And it also makes hormones to send to the pituitary gland, okay? So it also makes hormones itself, but also sends hormones down to the pit. All right, now number 6, the CQ. I call the CQ the wing, because doesn't it look like a little wing? Okay, use your imagination. But I call it the wing, okay? The wing, and that's my abbreviation for it. So what does the CQ do? Basically, it sends the impulses to the cerebellum. So it's going to send all the electricity you're getting from your skeletal muscles back to the cerebellum to control your skeletal muscle movements right there. And then we go up to number 7, the pons. Now the pons is a big area under the CQ, and basically it's going to regulate blood pressure. And so the pons actually lowers your blood pressure because it makes your blood vessels dilate. That's called vaso, means blood vessel. Dilate means to make it bigger, right? And so you lower your blood pressure. So if you have blood pressure meds, that's where it's going to work on, is the pons right back there in the middle part of the brain. Then what else does the pons do? Well, it increases. It increases your heartbeat, increases your breathing, and peristalsis. How fast you move things through your digestive system, urinary systems, through the blood vessels even. They all do peristalsis. And then it also regulates a couple reflexes. The pons does. It regulates your pupil size. It regulates blinking and hearing, how fast your tympanic membrane vibrates, and then your touch sensors in your skin, like Meissner's and Pacinian corpuscles. So that's what the pons does. And then the medulla oblongata, it's going to increase. It's going to increase your blood pressure by vasoconstriction. So when you constrict the blood vessel, it's going to be a smaller lumen, and then that's put more pressure against the sides of the blood vessel wall, and that's going to up your blood pressure. And then what else does the medulla oblongata do? It basically slows your heartbeat down, it slows down breathing and peristalsis. So it does exactly the opposite of what the pons does. The pons speeds up, the medulla slows down. And then the reflexes, a lot of major reflexes are controlled by your medulla oblongata. And so which ones are they? The coughing, gagging, sneezing, tears, saliva, hiccups, toe curls, and knee jerks, okay? And there are more, but basically those are the major reflexes by the medulla oblongata. So the pons doesn't do too many reflexes. It's mainly the medulla is your reflex center, okay? And now number 9, the mammillary body. And so it sends your sense of smell. So your olfactory nerve from your nose is going to run up into the mammillary body over there, and then it's going to send your electricity from the mammillary body on up. And so here comes, you just smelled something, and here it comes on your olfactory nerve, and the olfactory nerve is going to run in here and say, oh, you just smelled something. So then the electricity from here is going to go right on up, and it's going to go to your parietal lobe, where you can interpret and store your sense of smell right up there in the parietal lobe, okay? So that's what the mammillary immediately, and that's why the olfactory nerve runs right into this, and it sends the electricity. It's almost like a straight highway up, so that you can interpret and store the smells. And that's going to be in the parietal lobe, right up there, okay? All right, so that's what the mammillary body does. That's it, just associated with your sense of smell. And then number 10 are structures. They're actually spaces in the brain, and so they make CSF from the Lucy T choroid plexus. And we already labeled these with our Roman numerals. So 1, 2, 3 goes here and makes a 3, and then 4 is always underneath the cerebellum. So that's everything about the middle part of the brain. And remember, all these midbrain structures, except for the ventricles, those are spaces. Basically, all these organs are just made out of white matter, okay? So that's it for the midbrain. Now we're going to talk about the recording the electrical activity of the brain, okay, to see if it's functioning well. And so there is actually a test called the EEG, electroencephalograph. So I made a little guy here. It looks like Edward Scissorhand, all right? And basically we're going to put some electrode pads right here on the scalp. And so you have to shave off the hair to attach these because they have an adhesive, and they're going to have a little piece of metal in them which will pick up the electrical activity generated from the brain. And then what attaches to these electrode pads right here are wires, and so they're electrical wires, and they are called the leads. And the leads will go into the computer, and then the computer will have an EEG program already loaded, so it can interpret the electrical activity coming from the electrode pads into the computer. So now, once the computer gets this electricity in from the leads right here, then it's going to generate something on a screen in here, certain screen right here, and it'll generate different types of brain waves, okay? Brain waves, which are electrical signals coming from where we placed our pads. All right, so we can measure 4 specific brain waves, all right? 3 of them are in adults, 1 only in children. They're all in children, but basically the 4th one is exclusive for children. All right, so the alpha wave is the first one. The alpha wave, that means it's recording while you're awake, but relaxed, all right? Not doing anything, not reading, not thinking, just thinking about anything, just relaxing, enjoying life, all right? That's the alpha wave. Then the beta wave means you're awake and you're very alert. You're doing something, you're reading, you're processing information, and that's the beta wave. And then the delta wave is for deep sleep. It's the sleeping wave, the delta, and then the theta is the 4th wave, and it's only in kids, not in awake adults, okay? And so the theta is exclusive for kids up to about age 16, right? 16 to 18, right? All right, so then we lose that. All right, so those are the 4 that we can actually record with a typical EEG. And so that is this is the best test for basically seeing if the electrical activity is working well in all areas of the brain.